The Privacy Dominion
There it
had
is.
never lost a war.
The Falconer's Reach.
Not once, not in 11,000 years. Their armadas stretched across 400 systems. Their banners flew over the bones of 40 extinct species. Every empire they touched, they conquered. Every empire they conquered, they erased. Their history books had no chapter for defeat. Their language had no word for it. Humanity was next. For 60 years, Dominion scout drones watched a small, dim species crawl across a single solar system. Slow ships, weak weapons, no war fleet worth naming. Human colonies sat scattered and undefended, or so it seemed. Human patrol ships were old, small, armed with cannons a Dominion cadet would laugh at during training. Dominion intelligence reports called Earth a low-priority target. They filed it under species too weak to bother conquering quickly. A backward species, the Dominion's War Council called them in a report stamped and archived 60 years ago. Not a threat, barely a meal. That report was never updated. No one thought it needed to be. The last Dominion scout drone to pass through the outer Sol system had done so 11 years earlier, a routine sweep logged and filed without incident. Its sensors recorded 22 human patrol ships, the same 22 the Dominion fleet now approached with total confidence. What the drone's sensors did not record, because they were never designed to look for it, was the faint gravitational signature of 11,000 additional hulls, hidden with a precision that had taken 3 generations of engineers to perfect. The drone returned to Dominion space, delivered its report, and was quietly decommissioned. No one ever sent a second one to double-check its findings. 11 years of false confidence had grown, uncontested, into the War Council's final assessment. Grand Marshal Voss Cathern of the 3rd Krivksi Fleet stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Ashbringer, and watched the sensor feed of Earth's solar system. 12,000 warships waited behind him in formation, stretched across the dark like a black tide. 60 years of silence from a species with no fleet, he said. That is not caution, that is fear. His officers laughed. He did not. Something about the silence bothered him. Real fear screamed. Real fear begged. Real fear sent desperate signals into the void, hoping anyone would answer. This silence felt planned. He walked the length of the bridge, past officers who did not look up from their consoles, past screens showing the same 22 human patrol ships they had scanned for years. Pull every record we have on this species, Voss ordered. Every scan, every report, every year. An officer complied. 60 years of data scrolled across the display, and every line said the same thing. Weak, small, no threat. Voss stared at the pattern longer than he should have. He was right to feel uneasy. He simply did not know how right. Because humanity had not been hiding out of fear. Humanity had been building. For 60 years, every human shipyard the Dominion ever scanned had been fake. Every patrol ship they mocked had been a decoy. Every weak colony had been bait, placed exactly where Dominion sensors would find it. Behind a wall of lies, humanity built the largest hidden war fleet in galactic history. 11,000 warships, buried under moons, hidden inside dead asteroids, sealed beneath fake mining stations that had never mined anything at all. And it was about to wake up. 60 light-years away, on a Dominion border world called Keseth Prime, a young cartographer named Ilyara Nask updated a star chart that had not changed in a decade. She marked Sol's system with the same faded symbol used for every pacified world. She had no idea the symbol was wrong. No one did. The Dominion had drawn that map with total confidence. Confidence built on 60 years of scans that saw exactly what humanity wanted them to see. Somewhere beneath that false calm, the largest hidden war fleet in galactic history counted down its final hours in silence. The Dominion's own historians had written, centuries earlier, that no empire could hide a fleet of significant size for longer than a generation. Someone would always talk. Someone would always defect. Someone would always sell the secret for personal gain. Humanity had read those same historical assumptions, translated from captured Dominion records decades before, and built their entire plan around defying them. Every person who knew the full scope of Project Silent Anvil had accepted, in writing, that they would carry the secret to their grave if the plan required it. Most of them had. 3 generations of engineers, pilots, and officers lived and died without ever seeing the fleet they built fire a single shot in anger. They trained replacements. They wrote manuals. They vanished into quiet retirements and unmarked funerals, never once breaking the silence that made this day possible. The 12,000 Domini, on ships now crossing into Sol space, had no way of knowing they were not facing a young, undefended species. They were facing the accumulated patience of 3 human generations, distilled into a single afternoon. The Dominion's own archives held a warning they had simply never learned to read. 40 years earlier, a Dominion listening post near the edge of the Sol system had picked up a burst transmission, encrypted, brief, and never repeated. Analysts spent 2 weeks trying to break it before giving up and filing it as background noise from a dying star. They never told anyone that the transmission had, in fact, been broken, partially, by a single junior codebreaker named Yoran Des. He had reported 6 words extracted from the signal, then watched his report vanish into a queue that no one above him ever opened. The anvil does not rush. No one connected it to anything. No one flagged it for follow-up. It sat in a Dominion archive for 4 decades, 6 words that would have explained everything, ignored because the species that sent them was not considered important enough to decode carefully. Yoran Des retired without ever learning what those 6 words meant. He died 9 years before Grand Marshal Voss Catherine's fleet crossed into Sol space, never knowing he had once held the first thread of a warning that could have changed everything. The Dominion had not simply underestimated humanity once. It had underestimated them, quietly, systematically, for 60 consecutive years, in 1,000 small decisions made by officials who never imagined the cost of being wrong. They were about to learn that cost all at once. Grand Marshal Voss Catherine gave the order. Enter the system, take no prisoner, erase their capital first. 12,000 Crivesea warships slid out of the void and into Sol's outer edge, engines burning cold blue against the dark. Their sensors painted a clear picture: 22 human ships near Earth, old hulls, weak shields, no real coordination. "This will take 1 hour," said Fleet Commander Drassic, second in command. "Perhaps less." Voss studied the tactical map anyway. Old instincts never fully rested, even when every number agreed with easy victory. "Humans have not raised a single distress signal," an officer reported. "No counterfleet detected, no planetary shield activation." "Because there is no counterfleet," Drassic said. "There never was, there never will be." He was proud of that line. He would regret it within the hour. The Dominion Armada advanced past Neptune's orbit, then past Saturn's rings, scattering ice crystals in their wake. 12,000 warships, 300,000 kilometers of steel and plasma cannons, enough firepower to crack a planet in half and salt the pieces. Junior officers on the Ashbringer began placing bets on how long the human capital would survive. 10 minutes, one said. 5, another countered. They have no orbital defense grid worth the name. Drassic allowed the wagers. Morale mattered before a slaughter, even one this easy. In the Ashbringer's lower decks, a young Crivesea gunnery officer named Threll checked his weapon systems for the final time before combat. He had joined the fleet only 2 years earlier, too late to fight in any real war. "First blood today," his commander told him, clapping his shoulder plate. Try not to miss. It would be embarrassing against a species this weak." Threll laughed along with the others. He would not laugh again for a long time. Across the fleet, 12,000 crews ran the same final checks, confident, relaxed, treating the coming battle as a formality rather than a fight. Weapons technicians barely bothered calibrating point defense systems built to intercept threats far more advanced than anything Earth was believed to possess. No one calibrated for a threat they did not know existed. On Earth, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, a woman named Fleet Admiral Elena Reyes watched the same enemy fleet crawl across her tactical display. She did not flinch. She had run this exact scenario in simulation more than 400 times. "They're right on schedule," she said. 60 years of patience and they still walked in blind." An aide beside her swallowed hard. "Admiral, that's 12,000 warships. Confirmed count, no margin of error." "I know," Reyes said. "I helped write the projection that predicted this exact number 11 years ago." She pressed one button on the console in front of her. Far above Earth's orbit, hidden inside asteroid shells, buried under lunar dust, sealed inside fake mining stations that had run cover operations for 6 decades, something enormous began to move. Deep in bunkers across 3 continents, 60,000 human personnel who had trained for this single moment their entire careers received the same 3 words on their consoles. "Anvil is awake." No one cheered, no one celebrated. They simply began their final checks calm and practiced the way soldiers do when the moment they trained for finally, truly arrives. Inside a hidden hangar beneath the lunar surface, Squadron Leader Priya Okonkwo climbed into the cockpit of her interceptor, a ship she had flown only in simulation for 11 years. Her hands did not shake. "Feels strange," her wingman said over comms. "Training our whole lives for one afternoon." "It's not one afternoon," Priya said, running her final checklist. "It's 60 years. We're just the ones who get to finish it." Around her, 400 pilots sealed their canopies in the same silence, none of them born when the plan began, all of them raised inside it, trained inside it, ready to prove it had never been wasted time. Above the hidden hangars, on the surface cities never saw disturbed, ordinary life continued in careful ignorance. In a small apartment in what had once been called Chicago, a retired engineer named Robert Alvin watched the morning news, unaware that the fleet he had helped design 40 years earlier was minutes from its first battle. He had signed the same secrecy oath as everyone else on the project, decades before, and kept it even after retirement, even when his own grandchildren asked why he never talked about his old job. "Grandpa, what did you actually build?" his granddaughter had asked him once, only a year earlier. "Something for a day I hoped would never come," he had told her, "but that we had to be ready for anyway." He had no idea that day had already arrived. The news anchor on his screen spoke calmly about routine orbital traffic, unaware, like billions of other civilians across Earth, that the largest battle in human history was about to begin a few 100,000 kilometers above their heads. That too had been part of the plan. Panic helped no one. A calm, uninformed public could not leak a secret it did not know existed. Deep beneath the Rockies, Reyes watched a final readiness report scroll across her screen, listing every hidden fleet, every crew, every reactor now spinning up to full power after decades of careful, deliberate dormancy. "All fleets report ready," an officer said. "Awaiting your order, Admiral." Reyes looked at the number on the screen one last time. 11,000 ships, 60 years, 3 generations, one order left to give. "Let them come all the way in," she said. "We only get to spring this trap once. Make sure it's worth it." She thought briefly of her own grandmother, one of the project's second-generation engineers, who had died 11 years earlier without ever seeing the fleet activated. Reyes had inherited not just a rank, but a promise, passed down through a family that had quietly served this single purpose for 3 generations, without ever explaining why to anyone outside it. "You would have liked this day," she said quietly, to no one in the room but herself. Her aide glanced over, unsure whether he had been meant to hear it. Reyes said nothing further, straightened her uniform, and turned back to the tactical display, where 12,000 Dominion warships continued their slow, confident advance toward a trap 60 years in the making. "Final systems check complete across all 4 fleets," an officer reported. "Standing by for your order, Admiral." "Not yet," Reyes said. "Let them cross the Mars line first. I want them fully committed before they understand what they've walked into." The Dominion fleet crossed that line 11 minutes later, utterly unaware that a single administrative decision, made decades before most of their crew were born, had already determined the outcome of the battle they believed they were only beginning. The HFY fleet crossed the orbit of Mars, unopposed and unhurried. Their sensors still showed 22 weak human ships near Earth, nothing else registered on any scan. Then the sky broke open. Explosive charges tore away the outer shell of 6 dead asteroids near Mars in the same instant. Metal and rock fell away like a mask ripped from a face. Underneath, warships, massive, black-hulled, humming with power the Dominion had never scanned before in 60 years of watching. 200 of them, rising from where nothing should have been, engines igniting in perfect sequence. "Impossible," Drassic whispered, staring at readings that contradicted 6 decades of intelligence. "Those readings are impossible." Voss did not answer immediately. He watched his sensor grid fill with red, contact after contact after contact. Then the lunar surface cracked open. Hangar doors the size of cities split apart across the far side of the moon, doors that Dominion scans had logged as natural crater formations for 60 straight years. 300 more warships launched in perfect formation, engines burning white-blue against the black. "Sensors confirm new contacts," an officer shouted, voice climbing toward panic. 500, now 600, still rising, Grand Marshal. Voss's hands tightened behind his back until his knuckles ached. "His was a trap," he said quietly. "A trap built before I held this rank." On the Ashbringer's bridge, alarms began to scream, one system after another registering threats that should not exist. Human warships opened fire. Not scattered, not desperate, precise, coordinated, brutal, like a single mind commanding 1,000 hands. A single volley tore through 4 HFY cruisers before their shields even finished charging for combat. "That is not possible," Drassic said, gripping the edge of his console. "Their weapons scanned as primitive for 6 decades. Every report says primitive." "They lied to our scanners," Voss said. "For 60 years they lied to our scanners, and we filed the lie as fact." Another 12 HFY ships lost power in the same instant, drifting dark and silent among the wreckage of their own formation. Human strike craft, small and fast, danced between the Dominion's larger vessels, striking exact weak points along the hull with unnerving accuracy. "They know our ship designs," an officer said, voice shaking as he read the damage reports. "They're hitting engine couplings on the first pass, every time." Voss's jaw tightened, a muscle working beneath old scars. Across the Ashbringer's forward batteries, crews scrambled to reroute power to point defense systems that had never once been tested against an enemy firing with this level of precision. Alarms layered over alarms until individual warnings became meaningless noise. "Grand Marshal, we're taking fire from vectors we can't identify," a sensor officer called out. "Some of these ships aren't even on our battle map yet. They're painting new contacts faster than we can classify them." "Because there are more of them than our systems were built to track at once," Voss said. "Reclassify everything. Assume every reading from this point forward understates the true number." Because they've been studying us, he said, for just as long as we've been ignoring them. A Krivksi battlecruiser, the Talon's Reach, took 3 precision strikes to its shield generator and went dark in under 10 seconds. Its captain never had time to issue a single order. Along the Dominion's flank, an entire strike wing broke formation, scattering under fire they had no doctrine to answer. Then came the second impossible reveal. Dominion sensors, scrambling to reassess the threat, picked up energy signatures from the human ships that matched no known power source in the galaxy. Not fusion, not antimatter. Something else entirely, something the Dominion's own scientists had spent centuries insisting no species without Dominion lineage could ever develop. "They're reactors," a Krivksi science officer stammered, staring at his readings. "They're running on a design we don't have, a design we've never even theorized." "That's not possible," Drassic said again, the phrase becoming a refrain he could no longer stop repeating. "Grand Marshal," the science officer continued, "if these numbers are accurate, their ships have been outperforming ours in raw power output for at least a decade, maybe longer." Voss said nothing. He simply watched the numbers confirm what the wreckage around him had already made clear. The Dominion had not been fighting an equal. For 60 years, quietly, without a single confirmed sighting, humanity had been ahead. Drassic pulled up the Dominion's own founding doctrine on his console, words carved into the Empire's earliest war charters, words every cadet memorized before ever setting foot on a warship. "Superior technology guarantees inevitable victory," he read aloud, voice hollow. "That's the first line every officer learns. It's the first line I taught my own cadets." "Doctrine assumes the technology gap runs in our favor," Voss said. "No one ever wrote the version where it doesn't." Around them, 3 more Dominion cruisers lost power within the same minute, their crews staring at weapons that fired true and struck nothing that mattered. Absorbed by shields, their own scientists had called generations away from Dominion capability. 11,000 years of unbroken doctrine had never once accounted for an enemy who simply refused to be seen, until the exact moment being seen no longer mattered. Then came the third impossible reveal, and this one broke something in Drassic that the first 2 had only cracked. Long-range sensors, still struggling to reprocess the battle, detected a 4th hidden fleet emerging far behind the Dominion's own formation, cutting off any clean line of retreat toward open space. "That position is empty," Drassic said, staring at the display as if refusing to believe it could contradict him. "We scanned that region on approach. There was nothing there." "There was a debris field," Voss said slowly, understanding arriving a half-second before the confirmation did. "Catalogued as ancient wreckage. Harmless." "It wasn't wreckage," an officer said, voice barely audible over the alarms. "It was a fleet sitting dormant in Sid. A field of decoy hulls built to look exactly like wreckage. For 60 years. 400 additional human warships emerged from what the Dominion had logged and never questioned as the remains of some ancient, forgotten battle. It had never been a graveyard. It had been a waiting room." "They didn't just hide a fleet," Voss said. "They hid an entire battlefield and built our own maps to guarantee we would never look twice." For the first time in his career, Drassic said nothing at all. There was nothing left in Dominion doctrine to quote. For the first time in living Dominion memory, an active battle report used the word unprepared. Gunnery Officer Threll fired his first shot of the battle and watched it vanish harmlessly against a human shield array rated far beyond anything in Dominion records. His second shot did the same. His third never left the barrel because a human strike craft had already disabled his weapon mount. He stared at his dead console, the confident words of his commander still echoing in his mind. "Try not to miss." He had not missed. It had not mattered. Squadron leader Priya Okonkwo led her wing through the widening gap in the Dominion line, calling targets with the calm cadence of 11 years of drills. "Engine coupling, upper quadrant on my mark," she said. "Mark." 4 missiles struck as one. A Krivksi escort ship folded in on itself and went dark. "Confirmed kill," her wingman said, disbelief still coloring his voice despite the rehearsal. "It worked exactly like the simulations." "It was always going to," Priya said, banking hard toward her next target. "That's the whole point of 40 years of simulations." Behind her, the Dominion's proud formation, unbroken for 11,000 years, tore open like old fabric. Deep beneath the Rockies, Admiral Reyes watched the battle unfold on a wall-sized display, her expression unmoved even as casualty numbers on the enemy side climbed past the 1,000 mark. Behind her, an old man in a worn uniform entered the room, moving slower than he once had, but with eyes still sharp. General Marcus Webb, one of the last surviving architects of the original plan. "60 years," he said. "I never thought I'd live to see this day." "You built it to be seen," Reyes said. "Eventually, that was always the point." On the tactical map, 3 more hidden fleets emerged, each unveiling in a single, coordinated instant. One from beneath the ice of Europa, ice that Dominion probes had scanned as lifeless 100 times over. One from a fake refinery station near Venus, a station that had shipped fabricated ore reports for 40 years. One from a decommissioned shipyard behind Jupiter's shadow, listed in every Dominion file as abandoned. Each fleet numbered in the hundreds. Combined, they formed a wall of steel the Dominion had never imagined existed, let alone prepared to face. "Total confirmed strength," an officer reported, reading from a display that kept climbing. 9,000 warships, 10,000, full activation in 9 minutes. Webb allowed himself a rare smile, thin and tired but real. "They called it Project Silent Anvil," he said. 40 years of construction, 20 years of pretending we had nothing left to build." He pulled up an old, grainy image on a side display, a photograph from the project's earliest days, a handful of engineers standing in front of a single unfinished hull in a cavern lit by temporary floodlights. "That's the first ship," Webb said, "laid down 63 years ago, back when Earth's entire orbital defense consisted of a dozen aging satellites. Nobody in that photograph is still alive." Reyes studied the image, faces she had only ever seen in briefing archives, never in person. "They started before anyone even knew who the enemy would be," she said. "That was the hardest part to explain to every new administration," Webb said. "How do you justify 60 years of budget for a war against an enemy you can't name yet? Every decade, someone in government asked if it was worth continuing." "What changed their minds?" Reyes asked. "Nothing changed their minds," Webb said. "We simply outlasted the ones who doubted it and trained the ones who came after to believe in something they'd never seen tested. That's the actual secret, not the ships. The discipline to keep building something that might never be needed." A younger officer near the back of the room, one of the few in the bunker not yet 40, finally spoke the question everyone else had learned not to ask aloud. "Admiral, why now?" he said. "Why let it happen today of all days? We could have kept building, kept hiding." Reyes turned to face him, the wreckage still burning on the screen behind her. "Because a lie only protects you as long as no one tests it," she said. "The Dominion was always going to come, eventually. We didn't choose this day. We chose to be ready for whichever day it turned out to be." Webb stepped in quieter, more measured. "Every year we waited," he said. "The fleet grew stronger and the risk of discovery grew larger. 60 years was not a target. It was simply how long the lie managed to hold." The younger officer nodded, chastened, and returned to his console. Reyes nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on the battle. "Every fake shipyard the Dominion ever scanned," she said. was cover for a real one hidden 3 kilometers underground. Every weak patrol ship they mocked, Webb added, was piloted by someone trained for a war we knew, eventually, someone would bring to our door. He looked at the wreckage markers, multiplying across the enemy formation. We didn't know it would be the Krivksi, he said. We only knew it would be someone. On the battlefield, Krivksi cruisers scrambled to reform their lines, but communication chatter flooded every channel, confused and panicked, orders overlapping orders. "This is not a colony," one Krivksi captain screamed into his comm, static crackling around the words. "This is a fortress system. Fall back to Rally Point 3. "There is no Rally Point 3, another voice answered. "Rally Point 3 is under fire." Voss Cathern stared at the growing wall of human warships surrounding his fleet from every angle, the tactical display no longer resembling anything his training had prepared him for. 12,000 Krivksi ships, already bleeding numbers. 10,000 human ships, and still rising, still emerging from hiding places 60 years in the making. For the first time in 11,000 years, the Dominion faced an enemy who matched them, ship for ship, and had chosen the exact moment to prove it. "Pull back the second wave," Voss ordered, voice flat with the effort of controlling it. "Reform defensive formation at Grid 7. "Grand Marshal," Drassic said, voice breaking for the first time in his career. "The Dominion does not retreat. It has never retreated." "The Dominion has never fought this," Voss said. "Reform, now, or there will be no Dominion fleet left to retreat with." Beneath the Rockies, a communications officer flagged an intercepted Dominion transmission, translated in real time by systems built specifically to decode Krivksi battle chatter, another product of 60 quiet years. "Admiral, they're requesting reinforcements from the border fleet," the officer said. "Estimated arrival, 6 hours. "They won't need 6 hours, Reyes said. "This will be finished in 2. Webb studied the enemy formation, now fractured into isolated pockets across the system. "They still don't know how many ships we have. Should we tell them?" "No," Reyes said. "Let them count the wreckage themselves. It will make a better report than anything we could say." On the display, the human wall closed tighter, methodical, patient, exactly as it had been drawn on strategy boards decades before either officer in the room had reached flag rank. Webb walked to a side terminal and pulled up a timeline that few people outside the project had ever been permitted to see. 60 years condensed into a single scrolling record. "Year 1, he said. "First hull laid down beneath what the public still believes is a mining survey site. Year 12. The first generation of pilots begins training on simulators built to model an enemy we hadn't even encountered yet, based purely on projections of what a hostile empire's technology might look like." He scrolled further. "Year 28. First contact with Dominion scout drones confirms our threat models were remarkably close to accurate. Year 41. Full fleet strength reached for the first time, and immediately dispersed back into hiding to avoid any risk of discovery." "How close did we come to being found?" Reyes asked, truly. Webb paused before answering. 3 times in 60 years, a Dominion probe passed close enough to one of the hidden shipyards that detection was a real possibility. Each time our countermeasures held. Each time we rebuilt the cover story a little better, so it would hold the next time too. "And if it hadn't held?" Reyes asked. "Then Project Silent Anvil would have ended the same day it was discovered," Webb said. "That risk was accepted at the very start. Everyone who signed on understood it. We were never building a guarantee. We were building the best possible chance." Reyes looked back at the battle map, at the wall of human ships closing around a fleet that had once been the most feared in the galaxy. "It held," she said. "That's what matters now." "It held," Webb agreed, "because thousands of people decided, individually, every single day for 60 years. that keeping a promise to people they would never meet mattered more than being known for what they'd built. The human fleet did not wait for the Dominion to reform. Admiral Reyes gave a single command from beneath the Rockies, her voice calm and final. All fleets, advance, full offensive, execute Anvil Protocol. 11,000 human warships surged forward as one, a wall of steel closing like a fist around the Dominion's broken formation. What had been a defensive trap became an assault, methodical and unrelenting. Human strike carriers launched swarms of fighters in numbers the Dominion had never accounted for in any projection. Behind them, heavy cruisers opened fire with weapons built from technology the Dominion had never even detected across 60 years of surveillance. A single human dreadnought, the ironclad Genesis, tore through the center of the HFY formation, its hull absorbing return fire without visible damage. Its main cannon fired once. 3 Dominion battleships lost power in the same second, their reactors overloaded by a weapon no Dominion database had ever cataloged. Central formation is collapsing, a HFY officer shouted, watching his own display fracture into red. We're losing the middle line, multiple ships reporting reactor failure. Voss watched his tactical display fill with wreckage markers, not scattered losses, but structured losses. The humans were cutting his fleet apart with surgical precision, section by section, like a plan executed 1,000 times before. They're not fighting like a young species, Drassic said, disbelief thick in his voice, watching another Dominion cruiser vanish from the display. They're fighting like veterans of a war we never knew we were already losing. Because they are veterans, Voss said. We just never saw the war they were already fighting against themselves in simulation for 60 years. Human fighter squadrons swept through gaps between Dominion ships, striking engine cores and shield generators with pinpoint accuracy that suggested rehearsal rather than instinct. HFY point defense systems, built to counter primitive weapons, failed against maneuvers they had never scanned before, let alone trained against. A wing of 6 Dominion cruisers tried to retreat toward the outer system, engines flaring at maximum burn. Human interceptors cut them off in seconds, boxing them into a kill zone built from decades of simulated combat against this exact fleet formation, this exact class of ship, this exact commander's known tactics. They've fought us before, Drassic whispered, staring at the trap closing around his own ships. In simulation, thousands of times against a version of us that doesn't even know it existed. Across the battlefield, human boarding craft moved with terrifying calm, seizing crippled Dominion vessels not to loot them, but to study them, taking prisoners where possible, gathering every scrap of data the Dominion had spent 11,000 years assuming no one would ever collect. Aboard the ironclad Genesis, Captain Daniel Oss watched the battle unfold from his command chair, cross-referencing live enemy losses against numbers his instructors had projected years earlier in officer training. Projected losses at the 2-hour mark were 7,200, his tactical officer reported. Current confirmed losses, 6,900 and rising. Close enough to trust the rest of the model, Oss said. Signal all wings. Continue the pattern, do not improvise. You don't want to press the advantage further, his tactical officer asked. The advantage isn't something we found today, Oss said. It's something we built for 60 years. Trust the plan. Don't get greedy chasing a better one in the middle of a battle. Behind them, another Dominion cruiser lost power and drifted into the growing debris field. One more line added to a casualty count the Dominion would spend years trying to fully understand. Far across the battle line, Fleet Commander Eiko Tanaka led the Europa fleet, 400 ships that had waited beneath the ice for 60 years, into the widening gap on the Dominion's northern flank. Confirm target lock on the Dominion command cluster, she said. watching 6 enemy cruisers try and fail to reposition in time. "Locked," her weapons officer replied. "They're not maneuvering like a real formation anymore, Commander. They're just trying to survive." "Then make it quick," Tanaka said. "There's no honor in dragging this out longer than it needs to." Her fleet fired in a single, coordinated volley, a maneuver rehearsed so many times in simulation that her crew executed it without a single spoken order beyond the first. 4 Dominion cruisers went dark within seconds of each other. Nearby, the Venus fleet, commanded by a grim, quiet officer named Fleet Commander Diego Marchetti, closed the southern flank with the same practiced precision, sealing off the last open corridor a Dominion ship might have used to escape uncontested. "Southern flank sealed," Marchetti reported to Earth Command. "Nothing gets out of this pocket that we don't allow to." On Earth, Reyes watched all 4 hidden fleets converge on the battle map, forming a shape she recognized instantly from 1,000 tabletop exercises. A closing fist, drawn decades earlier on a whiteboard that no longer existed, now rendered in real ships and real fire. Inside the closing pocket, a Dominion heavy cruiser named the Devourer's Pride, one of the fleet's oldest and most decorated vessels, tried a final desperate maneuver, angling toward what its captain believed was a gap in the human line. There was no gap. There had never been a gap. Squadron leader Priya Okonkwo's wing had been holding that exact position for 11 minutes, waiting for precisely this move. "Target acquired," she said. "They think that's an opening." "It's not," her wingman said. "No," Priya agreed. "It's where we wanted them to go." Her wing fired in unison. The Devourer's Pride, veteran of 6 prior Dominion conquests, went dark in under 4 seconds, one more name added to a list of legendary ships that would never sail again. Aboard the ironclad Genesis, Captain Ose watched the last major concentration of Dominion firepower collapse into scattered, disorganized fragments. "Command structure among enemy remnants has broken down," his tactical officer reported. "They're not receiving orders from the flagship anymore, just running." "Then let them run," Osai said. "A fleet that runs tells a better story than a fleet that dies fighting. We want the story told." Across the shrinking battle line, the Dominion's proud armada, once 12,000 strong, scattered into isolated, dying pockets, each one hunted down with the same calm precision as the last. On Earth, Reyes watched the battle map turn from red to a steady, advancing blue sector by sector, ship by ship. "Enemy formation broken," an officer reported, voice tight with controlled excitement. "Krivksi 3rd Fleet is retreating toward the system edge. Confirmed losses exceed 6,000 vessels." Reyes allowed herself one breath, the first she had taken slowly in over an hour. "Do not let them regroup," she said. "Advance to system edge, hold nothing back, let them see everything we built." Squadron leader Priya Okonkwo's wing struck the flank of a retreating Dominion cruiser group, cutting off their escape route with practiced ease. "They're trying to run for the outer markers," her wingman reported. "Same pattern as simulation set 41. "Then we already know how this ends," Priya said, lining up her next strike. "Close the gap. Don't let a single ship reach open space." Below her, Gunnery Officer Threll watched from his crippled ship as 200 Dominion vessels tried to break formation and failed, boxed in by an enemy who had apparently rehearsed this exact retreat 1,000 times before he was ever assigned to this fleet. "They're not just winning," he said quietly to no one. "They already knew how we would lose." Across the system, what remained of the Dominion's once proud armada broke into smaller and smaller fragments, each one hunted down with the same calm precision as the last. Grand Marshal Voss Cathern stood alone on the bridge of the Ashbringer as his fleet burned around him, the viewport filled with drifting wreckage that used to be a war machine 11,000 years in the making. 4,000 Crivesea ships destroyed outright, 3,000 more crippled and drifting, beyond saving, beyond retreat. 11,000 years of Dominion supremacy, broken in under 2 hours by a species his own reports had called primitive. Grand Marshal, Drassic said, voice hollow, standing amid a bridge crew too shaken to speak. Orders. Voss stared at the tactical display, watching every human ship move with terrifying precision, like pieces of a single machine built and tested across 6 decades of quiet, patient preparation. They let us come, he said quietly. 60 years of weakness, it was never weakness, it was a performance. He thought of every report calling humanity primitive, filed and archived without question. Every council meeting that dismissed Earth as beneath serious attention, laughing at scattered colonies and outdated patrol ships. Every officer, including himself, who mocked a species that had simply chosen not to show its hand. They studied every battle we ever fought, Voss said, watching a human dreadnought glide past the wreckage of his escort ships, unhurried and certain. Every empire we ever crushed. They learned from our victories over other species and built a fleet designed specifically to kill us. That's not possible, Drassic said, gripping the edge of a console that no longer showed a single functioning weapon system. No species plans 60 years ahead for a war that might never come. No species has that patience. Humanity did, Voss said. Humanity does. He remembered now, a line buried in an old intelligence file he had read as a junior officer. One human transmission the Dominion had intercepted decades earlier and dismissed as meaningless noise. It had said simply, "We are not ready yet, but we will be." At the time, analysts had filed it under empty bravado, the kind of hollow defiance beaten species always offered. Before they fell, no one had flagged it for review again. No one had asked what "not ready yet" might mean 60 years later. Voss understood now that the file should have been reopened every single year since. "We had the warning," he said. "We simply decided it didn't matter because we could not imagine anyone building patience on this scale." The wreckage outside the viewport did not care what the Dominion had imagined. It only recorded what had actually been built. A final wave of human fighters passed within visual range of the Ashbringer's bridge, close enough that Voss could see the hull markings, close enough to know they could have fired and chose not to. "They're letting us leave," Voss said, understanding settling over him like cold water. "They want the Dominion to carry this story home." He thought back briefly to his own training, decades earlier, studying the Dominion's 40 prior conquests. In every one, the enemy had been erased quickly, thoroughly, so that no version of their resistance could ever inspire another species to try. Humanity had chosen the opposite path, and he understood with sudden clarity that the choice was not mercy. It was strategy, colder and more patient than anything his own doctrine had ever taught him. "A destroyed fleet is a rumor," Voss said quietly. "A fleet that ran home to describe its own defeat is a warning that spreads itself, faster and further than any battle report we could file." "Why would they want that?" Drassic asked. "Because a defeated enemy who runs in silence teaches nothing," Voss said. "A defeated enemy who runs in terror and tells everyone why teaches an entire galaxy to be afraid." He watched the last functioning Dominion ships form a ragged retreat line at the system's edge. "We didn't find a weak colony," Voss said. "We walked into a trap built before some of my officers were even born, and the humans let us watch every second of it happen, so we would understand exactly what we had done." Across the shattered Dominion formation, surviving captains echoed the same realization on every channel, voices flat with the particular exhaustion of watching a certainty collapse in real time. The great and ancient Crivesea Dominion, conquerors of 40 species, had not discovered humanity's weakness. They had discovered humanity's patience. And patience, when weaponized for 60 years and unleashed in a single afternoon, becomes something far more dangerous than any single fleet, however large, however proud, however certain of its own history. Signal full retreat, Voss said. All surviving ships jump out immediately. Do not engage further. Grand Marshal, the Dominion does not. The Dominion, Voss said, cutting him off, has never met this enemy before. Retreat. Now, while there is still a retreat left to make. Gunnery Officer Threll was pulled from his dead ship by a human boarding team 20 minutes later, expecting execution and finding instead calm efficiency. No one shouted. No one gloated. A human officer studied his uniform insignia, then spoke through a translator device. "You're a gunner second class," she said. 2 years of service. Threll said nothing, unsure whether silence or honesty was safer. "You'll be treated according to the conventions your empire never signed," the officer said. "We signed them anyway, 60 years ago, in case a day like this ever came." He stared at her, uncomprehending. His own empire had crushed 40 species and taken no prisoners in any of those wars. "Why," he finally asked, "would you prepare mercy for an enemy you hadn't even met yet?" "Because building a fleet in secret for 60 years, she said, only works if you also decide in secret who you intend to be when you finally use it." She turned and walked away, leaving him with a question the Dominion's entire history had never once required it to ask itself. Far from the battle, on the Dominion's ancient capital world, members of the War Council received the first fragmentary reports in real time, translated and relayed across 60 light-years by relay stations built for exactly this kind of emergency. Counselor Vekrash Orn, eldest member of the War Council and veteran of 11 prior conquests, read the casualty figures twice before speaking. "Confirm this number," he said. 9,000 ships is not a battle. It is the largest single loss in Dominion history." "Confirmed, Counselor," an aide said. "Grand Marshal Voss Catherine is currently leading the surviving remnant back toward Dominion space." Orn set down the report and sat in silence for a long moment, the first silence the War Council chamber had held in living memory. 11,000 years, he finally said. "We have never once had to ask this question before. What do we do with an enemy we cannot simply outproduce, outweight, or outlast?" No one in the chamber had an answer. 11,000 years of doctrine had prepared them for every kind of war except the one that Ad just found them. A younger counselor, Vex Marin, one of the few members of the War Council born after the Dominion's last major conquest, broke the silence with a question no one wanted to hear. "Counselor Orn," he said, "if this species has been ahead of us in secret for 60 years, how do we know they are not still ahead of us now? How do we know today was not simply the smallest fraction of what they possess?" Orn had no answer for that either. No one did. "We send envoys," another counselor suggested. "We propose terms. Better to negotiate from a position of caution than to test them a second time." "The Dominion does not negotiate," a third voice snapped. "We have never negotiated. Doing so now would confirm to every subject species watching that we can be broken." "We have already been broken," Marin said quietly. 9,000 ships broke us. The only question left is whether we admit it in private, among ourselves, or in public, at the cost of everything else we still hold." Counselor Orn rose slowly from his seat, feeling the weight of 11,000 years pressing down on a single decision he had never expected to make. "Send the envoys," he said finally, quietly, "and begin drafting contingency plans for every border system within range of human expansion. Whatever this species intends to do next, the Dominion will not be caught unprepared a second time." No one in the chamber believed that promise completely, not even the man who made it. 2 hours after the first shot, it was over. 12,000 Crivesea warships had entered the Sol system with total confidence, expecting an hour of easy conquest. Fewer than 3,000 escaped, limping toward Dominion space carrying wounds no Dominion fleet had suffered in living memory. On Earth, Admiral Reyes stood in the command center as cheers rose around her, officers embracing, junior crew weeping openly with relief after years of silent preparation finally paying off. She did not cheer. She watched the wreckage field on the display, where the lie humanity had told for 60 years now floated as broken enemy hulls stretching across 1,000,000 kilometers of dark space. General Webb stepped beside her, quiet, watching the same field with the tired eyes of a man who had spent his entire career waiting for a single afternoon. 60 years of pretending to be weak, he said, so the galaxy would leave us alone long enough to become strong enough to survive it. They won't leave us alone now, Reyes said. Not after this. No, Webb agreed. But now they'll be afraid of us instead of hunting us. That's a different kind of war, one we can win. Across the command center, technicians began the long work of cataloging captured Dominion technology, interrogating recovered crew, and calculating exactly how much of the galaxy now knew humanity's true strength. It would not stay secret. It was never meant to. 18 hours after the last shot was fired, Admiral Reyes stood before a podium in a briefing room on Earth's surface. Cameras from every major network trained on her. Billions of civilians watching a broadcast that would rewrite everything they thought they knew about their own species. For 60 years, she began, the people of Earth were told our defenses were minimal. That was, by design, a lie. Today, that lie ended, and it ended because it had done exactly what it was built to do. A reporter in the front row raised a hand before she finished. Admiral, are you saying our own government deceived its citizens for 6 decades? Yes, Reyes said, without hesitation. We did, and I understand the anger that answer deserves. But every decision made inside Project Silent Anvil was made with one goal, to make sure that if this day ever came, as few of you as possible would have to bury someone because of it. The room fell quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a truth too large to argue with immediately. How many people knew? Another reporter asked. At the height of the project, fewer than 200,000, Reyes said. Out of a species of billions. Most of them are dead now, having spent entire careers building something they were told might never be used. General Webb stepped up beside her, his voice steady despite his age. I was 19 years old when I was recruited, he said. I am 78 now. I have spent my entire adult life keeping a secret I hoped I would take to my grave without ever needing to use it. I am glad, more than I can say, that it mattered. Across the world, in homes and cities that had spent the previous night watching wreckage footage without understanding what it meant, the full story began to spread. Governments that had never been told the details of Project Silent Anvil demanded answers. Allied colonies scattered across the outer system finally learned why their supposedly underdefended borders had never once been seriously tested by pirates or raiders in 60 years. In a small apartment in T had once been called Chicago, retired engineer Robert Alvin watched the broadcast with his granddaughter beside him, tears in his eyes that he made no attempt to hide. Grandpa, she said quietly, finally understanding, this is what you built. This is what we all built, he said. I only ever welded one small piece of it. He reached for her hand, and for the first time in 40 years, said the words he had never been allowed to say out loud. We were never as weak as we let them believe, he said, not for one single day. In the days that followed, the work of rebuilding and recording began across the solar system. Salvage crews moved through the wreckage field methodically, cataloging captured Dominion hulls, recovering the bodies of the fallen on both sides, and beginning the slow, careful process of learning everything the enemy's broken technology could teach them. Squadron leader Priya Okonkwo stood at a memorial wall being assembled in the same lunar hangar she had launched from days earlier, watching technicians etch the names of the 211 human crew who had not returned. "Doesn't feel like a small number," she said quietly, "even if it was smaller than we planned for." "It never will," an older officer beside her said, a woman who had served in the project for 30 years without ever expecting to see it used. "That's not a flaw in the plan. That's just what it costs to keep a promise this large." Priya nodded, reading the first names already carved into the wall, wondering how many more walls like this one existed across Earth, each one holding a piece of the same 60-year silence. She thought of her own instructors, most of them retired now, who had spent entire careers training pilots for a mission they themselves would never fly. She wondered how many of them were watching the broadcasts today, finally allowed to feel proud of work they had never been permitted to discuss. "I hope they're watching," she said. "They are," the older officer said, "every one of them." Captain Osai, meanwhile, oversaw the transfer of gunnery officer Threll and the other captured Dominion crew to a newly established research and diplomacy station in high orbit, the first of its kind, built specifically for a future no one had been certain would ever arrive. "What happens to them now?" a junior officer asked him. "That depends on what the Dominion does next," Osai said. "But for now, they're treated fairly. That was always part of the plan, too. We didn't spend 60 years building strength just to become the thing we were preparing to fight." Threll, watching Earth's blue curve through a viewport for the first time since his capture, found himself unable to reconcile the mercy he had been shown with everything his empire had taught him to expect from a defeated enemy. It was a question he suspected he would carry for the rest of his life. He was not alone in that. Every surviving Dominion officer now made prisoner across the system carried some version of the same unanswered question, and every human officer assigned to their care understood that the answers given now would matter as much to the peace ahead as anything decided in a council chamber. Squadron leader Priya Okonkwo brought her interceptor down on a makeshift lunar landing pad, canopy hissing open to the recycled air of the hangar she had trained in for over a decade. Her hands shook now, for the first time all day. "You good?" her wingman asked, pulling off his helmet beside her. "I keep thinking about the pilots before us," she said. "The ones who trained their whole careers and never got to fly this mission. They built this for a day they knew they might not live to see." "They saw it anyway," he said. "Every one of us up there was flying for them too." Around the hangar, ground crews moved between returning ships, counting losses that were, against every reasonable projection, remarkably small. 211 human ships destroyed, 11,000 Dominion vessels engaged. The math had never worked this cleanly in any simulation, and yet here it was, real. Captain Daniel Ose walked the flight deck of the ironclad Genesis afterward, past technicians already beginning repairs, past pilots removing flight suits soaked through with sweat despite the ship's climate controls. 211, he said quietly to his tactical officer, reading the final number twice to be certain. "We planned for 2,000. "Nobody's complaining about being wrong in this direction, sir," the officer said. "No," Osa agreed. "But we should remember why the number was small. It wasn't luck. It was 60 years of people who never got to see this day making sure fewer of us would die on it." He looked out at the wreckage field visible through the hangar's reinforced viewport, thousands of Dominion hulls drifting silent and dark. "Log every name," he said. "Ours and theirs. Somebody someday is going to want the whole record, not J. Us the victory." Elsewhere in the command bunker, technicians pulled the first captured Dominion officer, gunnery officer Threll, into a debriefing room, treating him not as a trophy, but as the opening line of a much longer conversation the two species would now be forced to have. Far beyond the wreckage, The surviving Krivksi ships fled toward Dominion space, carrying a message no empire had ever been forced to send before in 11,000 years of unbroken conquest. Humanity was not primitive. Humanity was not weak. Humanity had been waiting. News of the battle reached Dominion border worlds within days, carried faster by rumor than by any official report. On Keseth Prime, the young cartographer Ilyara Nask erased the old symbol beside Sol's system and sat for a long time without drawing a replacement. There was no symbol yet for what humanity had become. The old chart, built on 60 years of comfortable assumptions, was simply wrong, and every mapmaker in Dominion space now knew it. Across 400 conquered systems, populations who had lived under Dominion rule for generations heard the story in fragments, then in full, then in versions that grew larger with each retelling. A species the Dominion called primitive had broken an armada in 2 hours and let the survivors go home to tell the tale. For the first time in living memory across those 400 systems, someone began to ask a question the Dominion had spent 11,000 years making sure no one asked. If humanity could do it, who else might be hiding, waiting, counting down their own 60 years in silence? Across the Dominion's 400 conquered systems, resistance movements that had lain dormant for generations, convinced that fighting the Dominion was hopeless, began quietly re-examining that assumption for the first time in living memory. Messages passed between systems that had never dared communicate about rebellion before, all of them asking some version of the same question. On a mining colony in the Threll Expanse, an old resistance leader named Corvin Ash gathered his surviving council in a room they had not used for open planning in over a decade. "We always believed there was no one strong enough to stand against the Dominion," he told them. "We were wrong. There is at least one. Perhaps that means we were wrong about more than we realized." No decisions were made that night. But for the first time in 11,000 years, hope moved through Dominion space at the same speed as fear, and no one in the War Council chamber had a plan for stopping it. Aboard the fleeing Ashbringer, Grand Marshal Voss Catherine stared at the empty stars ahead, damage reports scrolling past him unread, and spoke the only words that mattered to the recorder capturing his official account. "Tell the Dominion Council," he said, "humanity was never hiding from us." He closed his eyes, the weight of 11,000 years of certainty breaking quietly behind them. "We were hiding for this." Somewhere in Dominion space, 11,000 years of unbroken conquest ended with a single report, carried by a broken fleet, spoken by a defeated commander who had once laughed at the idea of human resistance. The lie was over. The real war had just begun. Beyond the wreckage field, beyond the memorial walls still being carved with names, beyond the councils on both sides now rewriting decades of doctrine in a single week, one truth settled quietly over both empires, understood without needing to be spoken aloud. The galaxy had believed for 11,000 years that strength was something you displayed. Humanity had proven, in a single afternoon, that the deepest strength was something you were willing to hide patiently for 60 years, until the exact moment it would matter most. No one on Earth knew yet what the Dominion's envoys would propose, or whether the peace being drafted in distant chambers would hold. No one knew whether the 400 conquered systems now whispering humanity's name would find the courage to act on the hope that name had given them. What they did know was simpler, and it was enough for now. The lie had done its work. The fleet was no longer hidden, and for the first time in living memory, an empire that had never lost a war understood, completely, what it meant to face one it could not win alone. Somewhere beneath the Rockies, Reyes finally allowed herself to sit down, the weight of the day settling into her shoulders all at once. Webb sat beside her, saying nothing for a long while, Two people who had spent their careers preparing for a single afternoon that had finally, at last, arrived and passed. "What happens tomorrow?" Reyes asked eventually. "Tomorrow," Webb said, "we start building whatever comes after the lie. That part we never got to plan for." She almost smiled at that. "Good," she said. "I was getting tired of following a 60-year-old script." Outside, above the mountains, the first ordinary sunrise sank. The battle began to break across the sky, indifferent to everything that had changed beneath it, and everything that still waited to be decided. Somewhere in that new light, a species that had spent 60 years pretending to be small finally stood, in full view of the galaxy, exactly as large as it had always secretly been.